Ajoba was a village with a very dark tradition. Its name, which meant big snake, was not because there were snakes everywhere, but because the villagers worshipped a cursed snake. Every year for 66 days, the people observed a ritual where they had to live by strict rules. No one could leave their homes after sunset. No one could lay with anyone, not even husbands and wives. This curse started many years ago when a woman was attacked in the forest by four men. After they were done, they left her to die, and as she lay there, a snake came out of the darkness. Instead of slithering away, its spirit possessed her, taking over her form. From that moment, she was no longer just a woman. She became a creature with the soul of a snake, driven by revenge. Since that time, she returned to the village every year for 66 days. During the day, the villagers were allowed to go about their business, but at night, she walked through the streets. She needed to shed her skin to keep her beauty and required the seeds of four men. During this time, no one was allowed to say her name, for to do so would mean instant death. This year, however, something unusual happened. 6 merchants, completely unaware of the ritual and its rules, were traveling to Ajoba. The merchants, Timi, Adan, Amaka, Obina, Chidi, and Ade, met in a neighboring village and decided to travel to Ajoba together. As they journeyed, they grew closer, sharing stories and laughs. Obina and Ade, in particular, became good friends. They often joked about Adan, the woman traveling with them. Both admired her, though neither was brave enough to admit it. As the sun began to set, the group realized they were lost, and just when they began to panic, they saw a young woman walking ahead of them. They hurried to her and asked for directions. "I'm going to Ajoba too," she said with a kind smile. "I know the way and can show you. It's not far from here." Grateful for her help, the merchants followed her, and as they walked, the woman began to tell them about the village, explaining that it was no ordinary place and that the people worshipped a snake. She warned them that tonight marked the beginning of the snake ritual and they must reach the village before dark, as no one was allowed outside at night. The merchants were surprised. They exchanged worried glances, but picked up their pace, eager to reach the village before nightfall. The woman remained quiet after that, leaving them to think about her words. They arrived at the village just as the sun was setting. The young woman led them to a large compound where outsiders could stay for the period they were in the village. It was simple, but a welcoming place to rest after their long journey. The first few days in Ajoba passed without much excitement. The merchants explored the village, sold some of their goods in the market square, and got to know the villagers. The people were polite but seemed wary, especially after sundown. No one ventured out at night, and the merchants noticed the villagers avoided certain topics, particularly anything related to the snake ritual. Despite their curiosity, the merchants decided to focus on their trade. The days turned into weeks, and they gradually settled into a routine. Each day they would wake early, go to the market, and return to the compound before nightfall. By the 16th day, life in the village had become familiar, and Timi, who had been quietly observing Adan since their journey began, realized he had developed feelings for her. Over the days, his admiration for her had grown stronger, and he decided it was time to make his feelings known. So one evening, after returning from the market, he approached Adan. "Adan," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've admired you for a while now. Your voice, your presence, it feels like music to my ears. I want something serious with you, something real." Adan listened calmly but remained unmoved. She had heard similar words before, not just from Timi, but from others as well. Chidi had already confessed his feelings to her earlier during their stay, but she had turned him down too. Adan knew she was beautiful. For as long as she could remember, men had always been drawn to her. While their attention was flattering at times, it also felt exhausting. She looked at Timi kindly but firmly and said, "Thank you, but I think we should remain friends. I'm not looking for anything more." Though disappointed, Timi respected her decision. He wasn't the type to give up easily, but he decided to give her space and hoped that, over time, she might come to see him differently. For now, he was content to remain her friend. As the days went by, the merchants grew comfortable in their routine, but a sense of doubt quietly lingered among them. The village seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, And the snake ritual they had heard so much about remained a mystery. Despite the stories and warnings, they hadn't seen a single snake, not even a small one, let alone a sacred or special one. They had heard so much about the ritual, yet they had not witnessed any signs of it. One evening, as they sat around their hut sipping on some palm wine, Amaka spoke up. "Have any of you seen a snake since we arrived? It's strange, isn't it?" she asked. "I thought we'd at least see one, given how much they talk about worshiping them." The others nodded in agreement. Chidi, who had been quiet, finally spoke. "I thought the same thing. No snakes, no signs of worship, nothing. Just stories. And the villagers won't say a word when you ask about it. They change the subject or act like they didn't hear you." Timi, still thinking about his conversation with Adan, added, "I don't know about you, but I'm starting to think this whole festival thing is just a cover. It feels like they're hiding something." The group fell silent for a moment, all of them lost in thought. They had heard the same stories, but the absence of any evidence made them wonder whether there was more to the village's strange rituals than they were being told. And so the next day they decided to keep their eyes open and observe the villagers more closely. Something wasn't right, and they were determined to find out what it was. What were the villagers hiding? Why were they so secretive about the snake festival? And most importantly, what would happen when the 66 days came to an end? After a busy day trading, as it was market day, the merchants returned to their hut to rest. The sun had begun to set, and the cool evening breeze offered relief from the day's heat. They sat outside, sharing stories and eating the fruits they had bought, but their thoughts turned once again to the strange customs of Ajoba. The group fell into a quiet discussion, each sharing their own speculations, when a young boy named Bayo passed by carrying a basket of firewood. Bayo had been lingering around the merchants since their arrival, always willing to run errands or share stories in exchange for a small reward. Rotimi called him over, motioning for him to join their circle. "Bayo," Timi said warmly, "you've grown up here. Can you tell us about the snake festival? Why are the villagers so afraid? And what's all this talk about snakes?" At first, Bayo was hesitant to speak. He glanced around nervously as though afraid someone might overhear. But after some gentle persuasion and reassurance from the merchants, he finally sat down with them. He began telling them stories passed down from the village elders. One story in particular caught their attention. It was the story of a woman who had once seen the snake. It was a large yellow snake with a very small head. It had entered her hut one night and took her child. The next morning, the woman ran into the village, screaming about the snake and what it had done. But before she could finish her story, she collapsed and died right there. Her child was never found, and the villagers believed it was the snake that took the child. The merchants listened in silence, some of them doubtful but intrigued. Timi, however, could hardly believe it. "So you're saying this snake just took a child? Why didn't anyone do something about it? Why didn't they set a trap for it?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Bayo shook his head, his expression serious. "They tried. My ancestors tried to kill the snake. They shot arrows at it, but the snake vanished. The next morning, 21 people were found dead, their bones crushed and scattered all over the bush pass. The villagers had to give the snake blood sacrifices for a month to calm it down. Ever since, only the chief priestess's family has been able to appease the snake." Timi, skeptical as ever, laughed. "This is just a story, nothing more. Why would anyone believe such nonsense? I still say they should have killed the snake by now," he said, brushing off the boy's words. But as Bayo grew more agitated, he warned them, "You don't know what you're talking about. The moment you speak its name, the curse will come." His voice shook with fear, but Timi remained unconvinced. He leaned forward with a smirk. "What are you talking about?" Timi asked. "This snake, this so-called curse." "If you're so sure of this, then let's hear the name. What's the snake's name?" Without thinking, Bayo shouted the name out loud. The moment he did, an overwhelming silence fell over the group. A chill seemed to sweep through the air, and Bayo's face turned pale. He froze for a moment, his eyes wide with terror, before he screamed in panic and ran wildly through the village. The merchants watched in confusion as Bayo bolted away, disappearing around a corner, his screams echoing in the distance. They stood frozen, unsure of what to make of what had just happened. The boy had been fine just moments ago. but now he seemed like a different person entirely. Days passed, and Timmy couldn't forget the sight of Bayo running in fear. He asked around, and one of Bayo's friends told him that the boy had disappeared. The story went that Bayo had slept with his siblings that night, but the next morning, he was gone. The chief priestess claimed the snake had taken him, but Timmy didn't believe it. He found it hard to accept that a boy could just disappear like that. Timmy went to Bayo's mother to hear her side of the story, but she told him the same thing. The snake swallowed him. It was the same story the villagers had been repeating, and he couldn't understand it. How could they just accept it? How could they do nothing to find the boy? Timmy was furious. "No one is even looking for him," he asked, his voice rising with frustration. "This is crazy. How can they just let him disappear like this?" He shared his anger with the other merchants, and they all agreed it didn't make sense. But they also knew they were outsiders in this village, and there wasn't much they could do. By day 46, Timmy found himself becoming more and more concerned about the strange events surrounding the village. His constant worry about the boy, Bayo, and his disappearance had drawn Adan closer to him. She saw his genuine concern and admired his willingness to question the mysteries of the village. Timmy didn't waste the chance to deepen their connection, and soon she agreed to court him. They began to spend more time together, their bond growing stronger each day. One afternoon, Timmy and Adan decided to take a break from the tense atmosphere of the village. They went out to share a quiet, private moment. They talked about their dreams, their ambitions, and the experiences that had shaped them. The conversation felt easy and natural, and it made them both realize how much they enjoyed each other's company. They ate, drank, and laughed, and by the time they returned to the village, a deeper connection had formed between them. That night, Timmy couldn't get thoughts of Bayo out of his mind, so he decided to visit the snake shrine. Despite the villagers' warnings, he had to know more. When he arrived, he started peeking around, trying to gather some answers. It wasn't long before he met the chief priestess, a fierce woman who immediately recognized the danger of his actions. "What are you doing here, stranger?" she demanded, her voice full of authority. "You've gone against every rule and ventured to the shrine of the great yellow-skinned one. Do you not know what this means?" Timmy stood frozen, realizing the seriousness of his mistake. The chief priestess glared at him, furious. "Those who come to the shrine either seek knowledge or seek death. What is it that you want?" Timmy, his heart racing, quickly explained that he wasn't there to die. He had only come to find out what had happened to the missing boy, Bayo, and he meant no harm. The chief priestess, her eyes narrowing, listened carefully. Then in a sudden shift, she seemed to hear a whisper, and her expression softened. The snake's voice, a low, hissing sound, urged her to let him go. She hesitated for a moment, but then spoke. "You are lucky. I will allow you to leave, but heed this warning. Run, and run fast." Timmy didn't need to be told twice. Terrified, he turned and fled. But as he ran, he caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. A massive snake, yellow and glistening in the moonlight. Panicked, he ran faster than he ever had before, his heart pounding in his chest. His legs gave out as the terror overwhelmed him, and he collapsed unconscious on the ground. When he finally regained his senses, he found himself back in his hut. The other merchants, hearing the commotion, rushed out to see what had happened. They were furious. Rumors spread quickly in a small village like this, and now with Timmy's late-night venture into the shrine, they feared the villagers' anger would soon turn on them. Adan was the first to come to Timmy's side. She took care of him through the night, tending to his wounds and calming his nerves. The next morning, Timmy decided it was best to stay with Adan in her hut. He didn't want to face the other merchants, especially since they were still angry with him. It would be better to lay low for the day, away from the growing tensions. That evening, Aid came to Timmy's hut, banging loudly on the door. His anger echoed through the compound. "Timmy, come out! We need to talk!" he shouted. Timmy opened the door, frowning. "What's wrong with you, AD? Why all this noise?" Aid stepped closer, his face twisted with frustration. "You think you can hide inside your hut all day, after breaking the village's rules and putting all of us in jeopardy?" The argument quickly escalated, and soon the two men were fighting. The noise caught Adan's attention, and she ran to try to separate them. "Stop it, both of you!" she shouted, stepping between them. But in the chaos, she was accidentally struck on the head, stumbled, and fell unconscious. Timmy immediately stopped and knelt beside her. "Adan, wake up, please," he begged. When she didn't respond, he picked her up and carried her to his room. Laying her down gently, he ran out to find help. While Timmy was away, Chidi saw Adan lying unconscious through the open door. He had always been jealous of Timmy's closeness to her. Adan was beautiful. Her smooth skin, bright eyes, and the way she carried herself always caught people's attention. Men often looked at her with admiration, and many tried to get her affection. But she had a way of turning them away with a gentle smile. Chidi had tried too, but Adan had never been interested in him. She had politely rejected him, and that rejection had hurt him deeply. His frustration and envy clouded his judgment, and unable to control himself, Chidi entered the room and did the unthinkable. He took advantage of her vulnerable state, committing a vile act. Adan woke up later, dazed and unaware of what had happened. Elsewhere, Ade had grown close to the orange hawker he admired, and that night he finally acted on his feelings and slept with her. But what he didn't know was that it wasn't the real hawker, but the snake goddess who had taken her form to trick him. Ade woke up the next morning with a strange feeling, but he brushed it off, not knowing the danger he had brought upon himself. Later that evening, Adan was on her way to Amaka's hut to help Timmy care for her, as Amaka had been feeling feverish earlier that day. While walking alone, Obinna, another merchant, approached her and claimed he had found something she might need for her trade. Obinna reassured her, saying it was just a short walk to his hut. "It won't take long," he said. "I promise it's worth it." Obinna led her inside and she stood waiting for him to show her the item. But before she could speak, he quickly closed the door behind her. And in one swift motion, Obinna turned and attacked, catching her completely off guard. Adan, stunned and overwhelmed, found herself unable to fight back. This was the second assault, though she remained unaware of the first. The next morning, the atmosphere in the compound was tense. Timmy noticed that Adan seemed withdrawn, but he assumed it was because of Ade's earlier fight. Ade, on the other hand, felt strange after his night with the supposed orange hawker, unaware that he had been tricked by the snake goddess. And Chidi and Obi carried on as if nothing had happened. None of the merchants realized the full weight of what they had done. On the festival's final night, Adan came to Timmy's room, dressed in her finest attire, her beauty almost otherworldly. "Timmy," she said softly, stepping closer, her voice sultry and deliberate. "We need to talk." Timmy looked up, his heart quickening at the sight of her. "Adan? What is it?" She moved closer, her hand grazing his arm, her touch lingering. "You've been kind to me, Timmy, different from the others." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I need you tonight." He froze, her intent becoming clear. "Adan, what are you doing?" Her lips curled into a small smile as she leaned closer. "Don't fight it, or wasn't this what you always wanted?" Her hands traced his chest, but Timmy gently but firmly stepped back. "No," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I care about you, and I wouldn't want to do this. Not now. It just doesn't feel right." Her expression shifted in an instant. The softness in her eyes hardened and anger flared in her voice. "You fool! Why do you resist?" she snapped, stepping back. "You're the last piece. The others, Chidi, Ade, Obi, they were easy to sway, but the ritual won't be complete without you." Timmy frowned, startled by her sudden change. "Adan, what are you talking about?" She laughed bitterly, her voice trembling with frustration. "You really don't understand, do you? I am not the woman you think I am. I am the goddess they worship, the great snake. This form is borrowed, a disguise to walk among humans. The others are already gone, because they broke the rules and lay with me, sealing their fates. But my time in this form is ending. But to shed my skin and renew my beauty, I need the seed of 4 men. You're the last Timmy, the last man I need to complete the ritual." His breath caught, the weight of her words sinking in. "You've been lying to me. I did what I had to do, and now I need you as well," she hissed. Timmy shook his head, anger and disbelief warring within him. "No! Whatever you are, I shall not be used." Her body shuddered as she let out a guttural cry. Her transformation began. Her radiant skin shimmered, turning into yellow scales, and her eyes glowed with an eerie light. She hissed, her voice no longer human, but the sunlight halted her advance. She froze mid-transformation, her glowing, slitted eyes narrowing as she glared at him. "The 66 days are over," she said, her voice full of anger and defeat. "You've ruined everything." With a final hiss, her body fully turned into a massive yellow snake. She slithered out of the room and disappeared into the forest, leaving Timmy standing in shock, his heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened as the goddess disappeared, her plans thwarted. By dawn, the village was quiet. The merchant's hut was empty, and they were nowhere to be found. The villagers exchanged nervous whispers, unsure of what had happened during the night. The strange events weighed heavily on their minds, but no one dared speak of it openly.